Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Building Machu Picchu, an Ancient Engineering Marvel, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Francis Casapino. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. Over to you, Francis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Rob, for passing it along. I want to thank every one of you who has the time just to spend some 45 minutes and an hour with me. I want to share with you one of the most fascinating places that we have in South America that has attracted people for a long time. I just, as you can just see on your big screen, I just picked up this picture because, well, of course, we're going to talk about Machu Picchu engineering and the beauty of it. So I just considered that the sketches of Machu Picchu would be the best way to get started with. So as some of you may know me already, this is me again. My name is Francis Casapino. I've been working for Natural Habitat for a long time, over 23 years. So it's been quite an honor just to really work for NatHab. And I'm a native from the city of Cusco that you see right there. We're located right, this picture was taken on the Incan Sun Temple. So I found it also appropriate just to post myself on it. And so you could see the beautiful city that you could visit in one of our journeys. Well, I am a graduate from business and hospitality and tourism in Cusco. I've been just traveling all these years throughout various parts of Peru and South America, but obviously one of the most interesting parts of my journeys has taken me to explore the Amazon basin. I became a national ranger at a very young age, living there in the depths of the Amazon in an area that is called Manu National Park, which is a very untouched part of the Amazon. Also, my passion, if you are a native from Peru, of course, you cannot deny seeing and finding and meeting, even almost stumbling on pre-Inca and Incan sites. So just that's why I was working as a ranger also at a national park called Nazca, which is very well known in this part of Peru, especially on the coast of Peru. You could just look at that picture. It's all desertic in Peru, where we have large geoglyphs, drawings left by a very old culture called Nazca. I was so lucky to be involved in the team that restored that particular figure that you see on your left side. So, so these experiences, this type of experience have given me just a chance to really be in contact with pre-Incan and Incan sites. And of course, thanks to the love and passion from my father, who took us up and kept us busy, taking us to the top of the mountains, and talking about, the ancient culture that we had. It's why today, of course, I want to share with you a big topic called Machu Picchu, an ancient engineering marvel. I said to myself when I picked this topic, I said, wow, Francis, you're just getting into deep waters. You're getting into a lot of trouble because this is not an easy task. Because we're just talking about a society that had no written language left, no paper, no ink, no sophisticated tools that we have today or other societies had before. And as you can clearly see just through this picture, it's not one of the easiest places to build a site on. So, but of course, before we go directly down into Machu Picchu, I want to take you back through a beautiful journey through Peru and South America, and in fact, just throughout the North, Central, and South America, so we could just see what went on before the Incans. I am so, and I just think that you seeing what went on before the Incans would be important for you to understand how, you know, the Incans ultimately came just to build something like this on a particular setting like this. So here we go. Get yourself started. Fasten your seatbelts. I picked up this map showing you what in science we consider are just the most important routes that humans have taken in their journey, migrating from Europe and Asia all across to the Americas. Some people, most of the people just take the green route, the upper route through the Bering Strait. People assume, of course, human beings have been walking along these glacial territories. Others assume that these human beings must have been rather sailing along the coast of the Pacific Ocean. And the other branch of scientists assume just that humans would have just taken the southern Pacific route to come from obviously Micronesia, Polynesian islands, all the way just to South America directly. Whichever the case, I mean, the DNA analysis that we have in South America just shows that humans in this part of the world, along with Native Americans in North America and in Central America, who share the same DNA test composition, we have an Asian and Mongolian background. So in that regard, I mean, it's going to be still just difficult to figure out exactly which others besides these other ones routes humans took just to come here. The truth is, let's just get down to this point, that these early humans, definitely who moved across all these territories, whether by land or by or sailing across the Pacific waters, had to move and had the guts to move across already a very well-known territory, apparently because of necessity of resources, or as we usually just do in NatHab, only because there's something interesting around the corner. But of course, these early humans couldn't have just left their country, their territory, their land, hadn't they just already gotten to understanding and achieving and inventing cutting-edge technology. You know what I'm talking about? Well, it's not that difficult. Arrowheads were very important, had to be one of the primary sources that humans had to figure out for hunting, along with hooks for fishing. You know, living just by the oceans or seas, they definitely had to figure out how to catch some fish. So these are the two earlier instruments and tools early humans developed before they decided to leap and take this journey into the unknown. There's another cutting edge technology that came along with it that no one pays attention to. These are needles. What you see on the screen are different kinds of needles. Needle, as simple as it looks, it's one of the oldest and oldest tools that haven't changed in the last 40,000 years. 40,000 years. I mean, this is serious. I mean, if this type of needle, of course, the ones you see are made out of bones or sometimes made out of snails, shells, and also all other mollusks and seashells as well. Their technology and their design is the same as today's needles. So it's one of those human technologies that haven't really changed over the course of 40,000 years. So they had to have netting, they had to have the access to sailing devices that allowed them just move along the waters. But needles and hooks and ropes allowed them just to put clothing together, to put pieces of hide, skin, and to cover their bodies to be able to face the environment and different conditions. So this I consider to be one of the most incredible human achievements or technologies developed that long ago, 40,000 years ago. They came to this part of the world, South America. Here's a map of South America. Either, as I was telling you, they just took down the northern route and walked across, We could just notice that the early settlements in the Americas are located on the Pacific coast. So that's why some guests assume humans really sailed across, settled on the Pacific coast, and then moved inland. So once they settled here in South America too, through the northern route or through the Pacific Ocean, they just settled on this part of South America, from southern Chile all the way just to Peru and Ecuador. Guess who have been to Galapagos? You must have heard about just one current, very important current in South America called the Humboldt Current. This type of current that you see right here with arrows flowing up the Pacific side. This is a cold water current. It's a nutrient-rich water. It brings in zooplankton, phytoplankton from Antarctica and just creates a whole rich food chain of zooplankton, phytoplankton, obviously, and along with it, sardines and other small fish, anchovy that feeds other bigger birds. So these guys just, when they landed in this place, they just say, oh my God, this is heaven. Let's just sit down and relax. It's at the earlier times when humans settled at this point down at the lower part of Chile called Tierra del Fuego, or on the mouth of the Amazon place. We have evidences of the early humans who arrived at these points at 15,400 years ago, that early. And when they settled here, they started developing a whole technology, but of course, most of these societies relied on fishing primarily. Of course, as it happens with humans, they're not really happy with the environment and they always want to go for the unknown. Many of them started leaving the coast to move into the mountains. Sorry. This is a little drawing that shows how not only men, but now today's in science, in the scientific community, we know, we have evidences that women were also some of the more fearless hunters at that time. They came up to a territory that was occupied by wild animals, but these wild animals were not occupying lowlands. If there is some of the guests who've traveled already to Peru before, you just know there's really no flat land in this territory. And whatever flat we find here is located at 10,000, 11,000 feet. So these early hunter-gatherers just came up to 10 to 11,000 feet to find wild animals. There's a picture of a vicuna, still a wild protected animal. It's one of the iconic animals that World Wildlife Fund helps protect in our territory. At that time, of course, humans had it as part of their game. They also hunted llamas and alpacas. Llamas on the left, alpacas on the right. Of course, these guys look a little tame now. But this was just part of the food. Over the course of time, but around 7,000 years later, approximately, these animals were being domesticated and became part of their livestock. One animal that is also quite unique to this part of the world, you've not seen it anywhere else but in the Andes of South America, southern part of Ecuador, Peru, and the northern part of Bolivia. It is an animal that looks like a joint between a rabbit and a squirrel. It has a squirrel-like tail with a rabbit-like body. Its name is called vizcacha. That was also part of their food. And of course, a Muscovy duck. Some of you who love nature must have just gone and seen Muscovy ducks in the Amazon and other parts of the world. This is one of the only ducks that was domesticated by the early humans. And of course, this guy doesn't need presentation. Sorry, I couldn't help it. It's near Christmas. I needed to show you just a guinea pig. Some of you might associate guinea pig with New Guinea or somewhere else in the world. You know, this little critter, it's one of the native animals that we find still today wild in the mountains of South America. This is one of the animals that was domesticated by locals and humans, and today frolic on the floors of people's homes. So it's part of their diet since then on. So as you can just see, these hunter-gatherers just move up to the mountains. Were not vegetarian. The primary source of food was just animal protein. And once they really were able to not only hunt animal protein, but they were able to domesticate these species, they created what in our world is known as a safe net. They just didn't have to go and look for wild guinea pigs any longer. So they had them at home. And that's when they settled and started domesticating, guess what? These roots you haven't seen yet until you come to Peru, oxalis. 9,000 years BC, the earliest roots that we have found in caves go back to 9,000 years BC. You know the potatoes. Yes, 2,700 species of potatoes. You had to be crazy to domesticate 2,700. You just would be happy and would survive with 20, 30, 50, or just 5 or 6. But no, these guys needed more. 2,700 species of potatoes that you find only in Peru out of the almost 4,000 recorded in South America. Then they domesticated maize. We'll not come into just whether maize really comes from Southern North America, Mesoamerica, or whether it appeared here. That's a different story. But 1,000 species of maize? I mean, how did it happen and why? Well, that was not only it. Quinoa, you call it superfood. It was just like rice, plain, simple, and common in the Andes for a long time. We have 100 species of quinoa that humans came to develop long before the Incas started running a party. And this is important. Of course, can you imagine the world without cacao, chocolate? Well, yes. I mean, I'm just mentioning few of the products, foods, fruits that was domesticated in this part of the world. We have beans, we have squashes, we have hot peppers, 4 different kinds of cotton, and agave, countless of other products just created enough food that allowed the rise and the start of any civilization, beginning. So in that regard, let me just take you back out now. I mean, it's not coincidence down. Take a look at just the picture on the left side, right, where all South America is. We have South America mapped out with extremely sophisticated societies that developed all from Southern North America all the way down to here. And of course, and this must be already outdated with all the information that we have today. There was so much, and nothing like this goes on without food, unless you really have a surplus of production. The drawing on the right side depicts just the profile of my country, Peru, in which I'm only highlighting in different colors some of the most important and known societies in Peru. And also, I mean, Ecuador and Bolivia on the south. There were hundreds of different ethnic groups and civilizations, all of them bringing up their own repertoire of metal objects, pottery, weaving, or construction. So in that regard, let me just briefly show you what we have from around 3,200 years BC. 3,200 years BC, that means almost 4,000 years before the Incans. There were civilizations on central northern Peru on the coast that were building gathering places, ceremonial areas, sundials in the middle of temples, astronomical observatories, ramps, and raised surfaces with meeting places and sacred pathways. This is called corral, one of the oldest ones in South America. Tiahuanaco in southern part, it shows you the construction. That's 1,500 years before Christ. Some semi-subterranean temples and the construction with the use of big blocks and the fitting, it's already present at around 1,500 years BC. Chavin de Huántar is another one well known today, studied by Stanford University. It's an incredible construction. It's called the temple, with semi-subterranean passageways leading to the middle of that whole temple in it, 1,500 years BC. Chavin de Wanter is a little example of what these people were doing with carvings, very similar to Central America, Aztecs and Mayan carvings. This one in this part of Peru, 1500 years BC. Those who have heard about Nazca lines, these big drawings on the desert of Peru that you only see it from the earth, that goes back to 100 years BC to 800 years AD. There's few examples of those that I can just want to show you. Major drawings that you will only distinguish them when flying in a small plane or suspended in the air. And that's why, I mean, there's a whole theory about extraterrestrials or just or humans who had to have, you know, devices that allowed them just see them and perceive these drawings from the air. Well, let me remind you that I'm just going very briefly through what went on before the Incans. There's a drawing that shows how just indigenous people were making these drawings on the desert with a very simple technology they had available. No theodolites by then. These same people were making polychromic pottery, beautiful, smooth pottery with different colors and designs, very complex, as you can see. Another culture called Paracas was already mastering weaving, also on the central southern coast of Peru, 900 years BC. I mean, not many people know about just humans around, you know, years, several hundred years before Christ, leading cranial trepanations and surgical trepanations, in which they were removing the skull with obsidian sharp blades. And no one quite knows why and the reason. It will lead just to a lot of speculations, but that already just means that that was a common practice and that they took medicine to a very different level. This is also for Moche on the northern Peru with exquisite pottery, thanks through which we can see the profiles of the indigenous people living at that time then. You know, 800 years AD too, similar to the people that you will meet if you just come to Peru in one of your journeys. Of course, I mean, when you associate Incans or Peru, you associate our country with gold and silver. Look at these pieces. These are pretty much 3-inch diameter earrings. So these are huge earrings that important male top-notch leaders wore at ceremonial moments. This filigree, this metal work is already very exquisite and was being carried out by other civilizations before the Incas. Well, look at this. I mean, let's just talk about that. These fearless people who were controlling and dominating in various parts of South America had access just to cutting-edge technology, military technology, clubs, slingers, bolas. That's primarily it. This was their cutting-edge technology. With very simple, simplistic tools, they were able to achieve many things. But of course, for what we know, they never used just that technology to control towns. They used, if you just look at the picture that I want to show you, they used a net of roads. This human, this person, this Peruvian man is walking on one little branch of a 17,000 mile of road system that comes to connect territories. If you look at the landscape on the back, look at all the farming land that exists throughout the mountains. 17,000 miles of Incan trail do exist in Peru today, is still being used by indigenous people, similar to in the time of their ancestors, lead them just to connect glacial line territories where llamas and alpacas are grazed to coastal territories, you know, at sea level. So the societies also by necessity created a system, a pony system, a system in which people were relaying information through runners. This is what it depicts. The runners, called the chasquis, were relaying information from stations to stations along the way. But how did it happen? Because they didn't have any written language. Apparently, most of that information was transmitted through poetry. Memorized sentences along with strings and knots. Their major and very drastic, dramatic landscape had to be solved through this technology, suspension woven bridges. That is a technology that is non-existing anywhere else in the world, but in just two places in this world. In the Tibet, high up in the mountains, the Himalaya territory, along with the Andes mountain range in South America, are the only two parts of the world in which, by necessity, humans have woven bridges. This is one Incan bridge on southern Cusco that is still being kept safe, alive, and restored and built every year, or once every 2 years, depending on the situation, by the native people, indigenous people. So swaying suspension rope bridges made out of straw is what the Incans had along their road system. That was an amazing engineering fit too. So I want you to share this type of information, because when we just go, we'll talk about Machu Picchu, we might be focusing on walls and temples, but no one quite really comes to understand that there was something that had to be existing prior to the construction and the undertaking of larger projects. So one of those was trails and the other one was bridges. The early 16th century Spaniards could not believe their eyes when they just saw this type of bridges. Their horses have to be walked on these bridges. Can you imagine? Just as incredible. Look at just that man swaying and tangling across. Just imagine several horses coming along their way. Well, I was just telling you, there were scribes, there were people, they had no written language, but they had a very interesting and rather unique system that allowed them to transmit information through strings and knots. Strings and knots. Today, that is called the writing Incan system. There's still a team from Harvard who is trying to decodify it, download all that information onto a computer and see if they could find a Rosetta Stone. Of course, that used to abound like books today all over in every territory, but only specialist scribes like this person could just do this quipus, could just weave this quipus and maintain all the knotting and transmit information from official to official. So everything like this had to be necessary before, something like the Incans started building Machu Picchu. This is another beautiful picture that I like. These are storages, Incan or pre-Incan food, good supplies storages, from clothing to pottery, clothing for the working groups and food for the working groups, along with farming tools and construction tools and dried up vegetables and so forth, were just stored up in places located high up on the mountainside. Along their 17,000 miles of road system, there were stations for travelers and messengers, for the Inca army, troops moving along, for whoever needed just a shelter after just a day or half a day of walk. These are called in our native language as TAMBO, tambos. And of course, when our guests come to visit Machu Picchu, we happen to go through all this beautiful story and history about trails. We walk on trails and we enter into tambos. We happen to walk through Incan towns and streets and so there was so much going on, as you could just see, before the Incas. Most of that development got started with the hunter-gatherers, and then when the people settled on the coast of Peru around, much earlier, but when they got established and started building their first astronomical observatories and temples and gathering places, that just goes back to 3,200 years BC. Out of the blue, around the 1438, 1450, one society appeared. It was not a new group of people. It was rather just a new group of people, a new group of young people, a new generation who started giving a new face, a new leap, a new change to the existing realm. The Incans, that of course were just one more, and in fact the last culture that was in power, were just in power for less than 100 years. They took the ability, they took the existing knowledge, they took the presence of roads, interactions, commerce, alliances and confederations that existed before them, and the Pan-Andean similar religion, cultural manifestations that existed throughout South America to a larger level. They just brought it all together and started building something larger. So no one really comes to undertake the construction and the gathering of a large society unless you have the resources that I described to you before. You know, almost more than 2,700 species of potatoes, corn. The Incans happen to have access to two of the high yield crops in the world. No other society had access to those two, corn and potatoes. And if you add to it the presence of countless and prolific guinea pigs, you are just saved, you are secure, your future is secure, and then you can undertake many more projects in mind. Well, Incans started here in Cusco, in the mountains of South America. And all this green territory that you see above on the western side of South America, all the way down to what is called Moli River, is the extent of the Incan territory. A territory that was almost 2,000 mile long territory. They put together 10 to 14 million indigenous people for what we know. They were extremely skillful at using their language called Quechua as their main Incan language, the commerce language. They forced those 10 to 14 million indigenous people just to use that as the new commerce language. They utilized the existing roads and the stations and the storage places. They enhanced them, put many other roads together, build others, and strengthen many others as well, to build the longest network, as I was telling you before, of roads that connected every little part of the territory. 1438, the Incans were just the most powerful society. There was no other one that was more powerful than them. Their power, though, didn't seem to have relied on just the power of the army, which in fact never existed. Because you don't undertake constructions. Look at this landscape. This is just the view that each of you will just come to get one of these days when you are at Machu Picchu in a sunny day looking over all these mountains. One of the first questions that comes to several of our guests' minds is, why? Why could they just come to build Machu Picchu on a territory like this? It doesn't make any sense. If there's any engineer in this team listening to me today, you'll agree with me. You'll look at it and say, wait a minute, what happened? What was in their head? Well, as I was just telling you, the Incas didn't conquer their world through the power of the army. In order to run an army, you just need logistics, you need support, you need places to be at, you need bureaucrats taking care of all those other things. No, this society was a farming society. But the undertaking of projects like this on jagged topographies surpasses the simple basic levels of necessity or comfort. So what we are about just to talk about and get to see, it's just the construction of Machu Picchu itself in one of the most difficult topographies in South America. These guys went down to a territory that we called the tropical Andes, a dense, thick forest, where vegetation is so dense with elfin vegetation. You can see mosses, lichens, ferns, orchids covering every branch of a tree, trees that are easily 100 years old or much older. Look at this picture. So this picture is essential because I wish, I mean, I could just have a little sign and show that to our guests when visiting Machu Picchu, but this is how the project got started. The ruler, if he ever came up to Machu Picchu at that time, to the place, to the construction site, he saw this type of landscape. He looked left, right, east, and west and said, oh no, where I am, how do we get started with it? So of course, you have to just imagine that a society at that time had to first get rid of all the trees and all the vegetation around it. You know, you could just see there doesn't seem to be a sign of, you know, solid ground or rocks, you know, or depth, cliffs or precipices or anything like that. They had to start, so they had to bring people up the mountain. We'll never know how many were required just to build this place. People were brought up here and took up their tents in the middle of the jungle. Their state-of-the-art technology, and let me show this to you, that Incans, as the ruling, the conquering group in South America had, was composed by axe blades. Look at these axe blades. They are not even that sharp if you look at the edges. And yet that's all they had to be able to cut off a tree. So with axe blades this size and made out of stone, the work would have taken up to 10 times longer than when you just have a metal blade. The hardest metal that they knew of was bronze. Yet they didn't have enough bronze, and instead they used stone axe blades. Take a look at some crowbars. I mean, I would say wedges, you know, chisels, people would call it, made out of bronze on the lower part. But if you try to ever use just a chisel of that kind to try to cut a stone or shape a stone, you realize it doesn't work. It doesn't work, it bends. So it must have been used for softer things, such as just sort of cutting trees, cutting branches and others by hand. As you can see, they were using their fists to hold up these blades to cut branches with it. The stones on the backside, you would not pay attention to it, but guess what? We call them stone hammers, Incan stone hammers. Their hammers didn't have handles. They were made out of stones, harder stones than the regular ones, riverbank pebbles, any harder stone that allowed them just break other stones with it. So this is what the Incans had for the construction. A little recreation sketch and graphics shows that how Incans would have used these stone hammers by hand to give shape and polish all the stone surfaces. One aspect that makes Incans so famous throughout the world is the perfect joint that exists between the blocks. You could see it through the drawing on the left side, left upper side. It is said you can't insert a piece of paper and a razor blade through the joints. And truly, when you're standing in front of those blocks, you just can easily see that there's no horizontal, vertical lines. There's no straight joints, and there's not really much space between the joints either. So it's an amazing world for me too until these days. Well, sorry, let's just go back to the next one. Let me also show you some other tools that not many people pay attention to it. Those are plumb bobs. Plumb bobs were used by earlier societies, from Egyptians to the Incans, in different forms, and these are some of them made out of stone too. So with this cutting edge technology and with their bare hands, they got rid of the trees. They got rid of the root system. And then after they just got rid of all the vegetation, they found that the entire place was composed by big boulders and a jumble of rocks scattered all over the place. The boulder in the center is quite a beautiful example of that. The wall at the base is just a support wall. They have to strengthen. They have to just create a stronger foundation that could support that existing block. And they just built everything around it so they could accommodate and create a very strong foundation. Machu Picchu itself, and here let me just show you finally the pictures of some Machu Picchu. I'm highlighting in this place the presence of some existing boulders that were never moved or that were in process of being moved, such as this one. In some cases, they used already the presence of many weathered rocks that had already cracks and grooves to get stones from it. But in most other cases, they utilized these stones as the foundation for the newer buildings or the access to the second story of the buildings. The topography was not easy, yet they had to move blocks. In this case, sorry, I couldn't just find really a much clearer picture. Some of these pictures were taken much earlier by one investigator, Jean-Pierre Pratzen, who made one of the earliest studies on Inca construction and movement of the stones. Of course, Incas never really pushed up at 17-ton blocks that size, but rather they used ramps, as you can see through the arrow, orange arrow line, or just those knobs that I'm pointing out with the arrows that were used to put levers, trunks of trees, to hoist them, to push them, to lift them, to prop the blocks up while moving and sliding across. A landscape like this in Machu Picchu is so difficult. The gradient is almost 35 degrees. Yet they just built a whole set of terraces. The construction, now we know, started from the bottom all the way up to the top. And instead of moving the blocks up, they rather slid the blocks, the existing big blocks, down to the lower terrace, the construction of the lower terrace. And that's how the construction started moving up, but the blocks were slid down. They created terraces, which allowed Incans have a little more flat space to build houses, buildings, or as these ones you see in the picture, storages. Another incredible part of Machu Picchu is the terracing that I was telling you before, because it's not a simple technology. These straight flat surfaces is a result of walls, as you can see on the right square, walls that were built from the bottom or all the way down to where they could find bedrock up. And as they were building the blocks up, they were just bringing in different types of soil that you can clearly perceive it on the drawing. There is a medium-sized gravel at the very bottom. There's fine sand and gravel as the second layer, and a top layer, almost 3 feet of good top layer that exists on every terrace in Machu Picchu. The dirt sample shows that the soil had to be brought up from 2,000 feet below, from the riverbank and the surrounding areas. They created 11.2 acres of fertile soil out of just that, out of nowhere, out of the thin air. Another incredible part of Machu Picchu engineering is the canals and weep holes. Let me just return back. If you look at the terraces and the foundation, that in our world, we call it as French drain, and you can use that technology to create a flower pot. Well, Incans were turning every terrace into a massive flower pot, which ultimately also helps sifting the water out and getting rid of really 78 inches of rainfall that this place faces every year through weep holes. As you can see, 4 different types of weep holes that were found throughout Machu Picchu. But a place like this in the middle of nowhere and on a narrow ridge of a mountain needs water, to make it accessible and livable. Well, what is one of the resources they thought about? They brought water through one major channel into Machu Picchu, apparently wide and deep enough just to even face any potential rainfall more than usual expected at Machu Picchu. There was a team from Colorado who came to study the water engineering and canals at Machu Picchu, the right water engineering, that has revealed the presence of these water canals and series of fountains that allowed Incans bring the water to these, we call them fountains, or places where they collected the water for drinking, cooking, washing, construction, but apparently not as bath. These type of fountains exist throughout one central part of Machu Picchu. Here, one of the great views of Machu Picchu that we see in the afternoon just shows you that they accommodated the entire construction to the presence of mounds of boulders and high reliefs and lower depressions, creating terraces that diverted water off the side very quickly, more than just trying to keep it in one place. The arrows on the top part of this iconic mountain called Huayna Picchu shows that they were not only happy with building Machu Picchu at the bottom, they were happy with building much more construction on the top of that mountain and various mountains around the surroundings. Mountains were already sacred for them. And far in the distance, you can see in the backdrop, the big tall mountain called Machu Picchu. And the picture before was of Huayna Picchu mountain. I'm showing you different pictures that shows how terraces that were accommodating to the natural relief of the terrain help sifting the water and diverting water through natural grooves and weaknesses of fissures that they found have naturally existed and have helped for hundreds of years drain the water out of this slope. This is some classic pictures that we have in the afternoon. This allows us, when you just come to visit Machu Picchu, you just realize there's no way how you can take bad pictures. I mean, at every angle, there's good views. Then you realize that all the construction and the layout goes associated with the mountains in the surroundings. They build the place following specific axes like southeast, northwest, which is called a solstitial cross line, which allow them have access to amazing sunsets or incredible sunrises, times in which obviously the sun is beaming, it's coming right through the entire hill and lighting the entire place until very late in the afternoon. A place that was built on a narrow ridge of a mountain definitely allowed them just have access to those striking views. The streets, the water canals, I mean, even just the walkways, doorways, windows, passageways are meant to be directed towards specific parts of the mountains where there are June solstice points, sunrise points, or sunsets. As you can clearly see through this very last picture, laying out Machu Picchu with the striking views through the streets and the walkways, windows and doorways, it's a very good indication that the engineers, hyphenated astronomers in the Incan times, had come to conceive this place as the city of peace, a sacred place in which they didn't want to only build a city for, to house people in a common, normal sense. You will, as you come to Peru and explore Machu Picchu, you will realize that this place was just a private home, a private place that has more temples, more astronomical observatories, and these incredible alignments toward mountains and views. We call them feng shui today, that would have allowed these groups of indigenous people have a religious control over a large vast of their territory. This is just a good picture of the sunrise in June 21st. Thank you so much.
All right, Francis, thank you so much. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. Okay, let's get to some questions. So when humans migrated here, how many people are believed to be in these groups? Were they large groups or were they individuals scattered coming here?
Well, let me just tell you one thing. I mean, 28% out of 32 million Peruvians, 28% are still indigenous people. And a big number of indigenous people living in the Amazon are still going back to this origin. The incredible part of South America is that we can just trace back our DNA to those hunter-gatherers times. We have so beautiful information through pottery and weaving that just brings out all those, as you've seen, these facial features and profiles that haven't changed. And in our journeys throughout Peru, that's one of the things that I love sharing with people. I say to them, oh, here we are, look look carefully and spend some time with the locals, because this is it. The Incas are not gone. I mean, there's still a very strong number of indigenous people that we can that are part of this old background.
Great, thank you. So, do we know how they accomplished getting such straight lines for their buildings and windows?
That's a tough question. That's a tough question. Well, we're facing a society that had no written language. Not only that, I was telling you also no stronger metal than bronze, but there is no measure device that was ever found yet. No ruler, no compass, no straight line, not even cords that would have allowed them just build those walls. One of the mysteries of Machu Picchu and the magic about coming to visit Peru is definitely that we just have nothing for a society that builds so much in such a short period of time.
Intriguing. So, one of our guests had read that they had found most of the bones that they had found in Machu Picchu were mostly women and children. Is that true? And if so, do we know why?
This is a great question. Well, let me make it easier. There was an investigation. Well, in fact, all that information comes from the first excavations and the recollection of skeletal remains carried out in 1912 by Hiram Bingen and George Eaton, the osteologist. So they just put all the bones together, and at that early time in 1912, of course, the osteologists were not experts on Native American remains. So when they just put together all the bones, they separated skulls by size and femurs by size. So they just noticed that there was a larger number of larger femurs in comparison with much thinner and smaller femurs and skulls as well. So in that regard, people my size would have just been considered female. Pelvis was never taken into consideration until much decades later. So that information was a bit wrong, but it was being utilized, and I used that in my earlier tours of Machu Picchu in the late 80s. I was just already talking about that. But in 2014, they made a reanalysis of the skeletons, and they found that they were half and half. There were men and women, and through the pelvis, we just know that many of them were mothers, got pregnant and had children. Perhaps not at Machu Picchu, but when they were mothers. So half and half people. Thanks.
Very interesting. So, do we know how climate change has affected the water supply in Machu Picchu?
That is very interesting. First, when Bingen arrived to Machu Picchu, he saw that the water was still flowing through this water canal, only one water canal that flows right through half a mile along the Incan building. He found 2 failures on the water canal due just to rocks falling in and trees, but the water kept on flowing. So apparently there was no much change in the flow of water. And then there's also a study that was carried out considering the flow of water that goes back almost to 1740s. And they've just they've noticed that really the climate change from that time until pretty much the Incan times haven't changed that much. There were some seasons in which the water definitely was a little higher, rain, and the water collected through the canal, of course, would have just risen normally, but apparently water shortage at Machu Picchu was never a problem.
Great, thank you for that answer. Now, if I wanted to travel with NatHab to Machu Picchu, would I be seeing many of the things that you showed us today?
This is neat too. Well, on the first part of my webinar, I was just trying to expose you just to the richness of pre-Incan societies throughout various parts of Peru, northern, southern part of Peru. I assume just through direct requests through NatHab, they can just put something separate going to one of those other places. But we are primarily focusing on visiting the Sacred Valley of the Incans, visiting Machu Picchu, and many other sites that were built by the Incans along the Sacred Valley of the Incas. But yet, when you are also traveling throughout Cusco, the high mountains, and the Sacred Valley, we happen to stumble on pre-Incan sites. We happen to stumble on temples and trails. We happen to see the people and see the animals, obviously. Yes, all that reaches, just it's comprising one of the most interesting and dynamic and rich environment that it's all around Cusco area primarily. But yeah, I mean, in regard to Machu Picchu, I mean, this is a little bit, because we definitely happen the chance to enjoy beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunrises, not only in clear days like this, but it could also be in the rainy season when the clouds drift and move apart. It also becomes beautiful. Yes.
Do you hike the Inca Trail on the trip?
We hike several trails, short portions of several trails almost every day. And we show them the beauty of these Incan trails. But the so-called Incan Trail to Machu Picchu is a 27-mile hike. It's a 4-day hike in which you ascend 8,000 feet up and 8,000 feet down on the stairs that some young people do to get to Machu Picchu for, in 4 days of walk. Of course, we don't do that. But on our tour of Machu Picchu, we just tend to go to the highest place to get the classic panoramic view of Machu Picchu. And we walk on that last stretch of the Incan Trail, so you can just see it. You can see every part of the trail leading out from Machu Picchu.
Well, Francis, that's going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to throw it back to you for any closing comments you might have for us.
Well, thank you so much. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I know Machu Picchu is an exciting place. It's been just the icing on the cake for explorers since a very early time. And I just want to invite you all to come over here. I mean, it's a fantastic place. It's not only the place, it's not only the geography and the landscape, it's the people. You'll be able just to meet and interact with the people, work out and have some activities that require some nice, not strenuous physical activities, but encouraging enough for you to just to feel well and fine, and come to discover a beautiful, beautiful site that we have for you through NatHab. Thank you all for your time.
Francis, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Now, if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at the number on your screen, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.